Counter-Strike requires a mixture of different skills. Unlike a game such as baseball, where there is very cut and dry sets of skills required, pitching, batting, catching, running, CS is a bit more vague with what's required. To combat this, I devised this diagram of fundamentals. You have intellectual skills, mechanical skills, and synergistic skills. If you ignore any of them, you'll find yourself having glaring weaknesses that others will exploit. Many players will assume just grinding mechanics or having a high IQ from browsing Reddit will be enough to carry them to success. This is false. Any professional or high-level player will tell you that being balanced is preferable. However, even though each element has its purpose, there are certainly aspects that are more important than others. This is a misconception I see a lot with Counter-Strike. People will give good advice, but it won't be explained what should be prioritized. This video explains each of these elements and what should be emphasized on more. First, you have primary skills. Positioning, aiming, roll, pushing, and peeling. These are most applicable up to Gold Nova 1. Next, you have secondary skills. Team play and solo play, tactics, weapon mastery. These are most applicable between Gold Nova and DMG. Then finally you have tertiary skills. Communication, movement mastery, util use, and util aim. These are most applicable in LE and beyond. Central zone. I derived the idea of push and peel from my experience in Overwatch. Pushing is simply proactively attacking something, and peeling is reactively defending something. I prefer the word push because it conveys the idea you are forcing against something resisting you, whereas peeling is like you are stripping away from someone's attack, resisting their momentum. These are the most ambiguous skills in CS. This is because they contain elements of all three groups, often making it hard to improve them, since they are so interconnected. However, if you understand that you simply can improve the groups themselves, and that will then have a knock-on effect to your pushing and peeling, it simplifies the process. To further simplify, I organized them into two forms of pushing and peeling. General and specific. General is about the broad fundamentals that make up an attack or defense, whereas specific is how these fundamentals apply to a specific map or situation. We practice general by developing an understanding of what makes good offenses and defenses, balancing various factors like time spent, resources available, positions held. These all make up a strong offense or defense. Specific is practiced through what I call flow maps. A flow map is essentially an intuitive understanding of how a situation will play out, which then lets you make informed decisions on what to do in said situation. I'll draw one out for you here. The terrorists are attacking Mirage A site early in the round. It's a full buy round and everyone is alive. First, stairs is smoked. Second, ticket booth is mollied. Third, a terrorist rotates out from both A ramp and A palace. Fourth, the palace player plants after smoking his ticket sightline. This map of various actions creates a clear flow to the situation. If you are T, it's quite clear you should support the offense in some way. And if you're CT, it's obvious you should play slow and wait for the utility to clear. The idea is you memorize all common flow maps for the maps you play. This then gives you confidence in how to deal with every situation. It takes about 10 hours of playing a map to intuitively memorize a majority of the flow maps, so not a huge amount of time. However, if you want to go beyond that, it will take an increasingly long period of time to learn all the obscure quirks to a map. Intellectual skills. Where/when to position. Standing in a good or bad position makes a world of difference in games as volatile as CS. The markers of a good position is best explained through this diagram. You want to be in a place in which both your enemy is vulnerable and you are invulnerable. As long as you can find these sweet spots where both these things are fulfilled, you are in a good position. Now, where this gets difficult is that a good position can very quickly turn into a bad position based on timing. For example, you are flanking an enemy when suddenly their teammate checks behind and catches you. This added nuance, where time affects the power of a position, is best understood through situational and generalist positions. A situational position is one in which it is only useful in specific circumstances, whereas generalist positions are ones which are useful in a lot of circumstances. One of, if not the first thing you should learn on a CS map, is this dynamic, meaning you should know off by heart which positions are generally useful and which positions are situationally useful. Ideally, you should even know what circumstances said situational positions are useful in. A great example being fence on B site Dust 2. This position is effectively useless, except for, say, surprising someone who's pushing from tunnels. Memorize all positions, generalist and situational, on the maps you want to get good at. Tactics. This is the purest expression of intellectual skill. Unfortunately, it isn't as important as you would assume. This is because tactics are limited by two important factors: random chance and your mechanical skill. Because of this, the best tactical methods are ones which are reliable and easy. Here's a list of commonly used tactics, from most reliable to least. Collapsing. Waiting for kills, then swarming a gap in the enemy's defenses. Abusing. Using a powerful position on a map to gain an advantage, e.g. going A long on Dust 2. Rushing. Going as fast as possible and swarming a position. Lurking. Waiting around and holding unexpected positions to then surprise the enemy as they rotate. Faking. Feigning a bomb site or a position to make your enemy waste time. Stalling. Waiting out for as long as possible, whilst minimizing resources spent, then attacking through surprise. In short, tactics is about finding a path of least resistance towards your win condition. That may sound cool, but in truth the most effective tactics aren't really that glamorous. To build on this, a common thread within every tactic is the idea of leveraging advantages and minimizing disadvantages. Examples of advantages and disadvantages: amount of players alive, what information both teams have, strength of your current economy versus enemy's economy, effect of utility, what positions people are playing, what angles people are focused on. When leveraging these factors, you pay attention to the game state and then try to slot into one of those broader tactical methods I mentioned earlier. We do this because, as the game progresses, those different advantages and disadvantages will fluctuate. When the time is right, or you have purposefully forced something, you then strike using whatever method is the shortest path. The rule of thumb is to make sure you have a simple overview of all factors, not a deep understanding of a single factor. This is because you can't run the risk of having big openings. An example would be, you have great understanding of the economy and that you should buy a deagle this round for the best chances. But then, you completely blunder knowing what positions the enemies are playing and walk head on into a 3-player stack on A side. In this situation, if you hadn't done some complex calculation and made a mediocre economics choice, but you had at least the basic knowledge that they were stacked on A, you would have made a much better overall decision. Of course, this is a really basic example and probably won't apply too much to a real game. It's more meant to convey that you should be placing more attention on having a holistic knowledge of what's happening and not a fantastically deep knowledge of just a handful of things. Communication. Comms should be as simple and direct as possible, while still conveying a message. They take two forms generally: an information comm or a tactical comm. It's okay to give quite a lot of informational comms, but you shouldn't be giving tactical comms that frequently. An information comm is merely telling your teammates about something that's happened, e.g. where you spotted a player or if someone's watching an angle. The goal should be just to provide useful intel. A tactical comm, on the other hand, should mainly be given at the start of rounds and be very easy to understand. If you start giving complex tactics, not only is it kind of annoying to hear, but it's probably not that useful either. Common tactical comms is suggesting a bomb site to go to, or requesting help with something you are trying to do. In regards to toxicity, I don't think it's insanely important to not be toxic. I would suggest you don't, ideally, but in all fairness, CS is a relatively abrasive community anyway, so unless you are really being scummy towards someone, I doubt it will have a super significant effect on your games. Mechanical skills. Where/when to aim. If you've played Deathmatch in CS, you may have noticed some players are seemingly untouchable, whilst others are walked over no problem. A key difference between these players is how good they are at knowing where to aim and at what times. This creates the air of invincibility, because they aren't leaving gaps where they are vulnerable to other players. This dynamic is even more important than your overall aim skill, since it reduces your time to kill. The real bread and butter of CS is reducing the TTK of enemies, whilst increasing the TTK for yourself. That is to say, make it easy to hit them and hard to hit you. We can improve this through 3 primary factors: probabilities, priorities, and peaks. Probabilities. This is about creating a map of more or less likely positions of where people can be positioned in your head, creating an intuitive understanding of where you should be wary of. This plays out like a sea of information with ebbs and flows leading in different directions. These probabilities exist on either a macro or micro level. An example of macro would be, there's a 60% chance somebody will be playing B this round. These macro possibilities talk about general positions and probabilities, which then feed into our micro probabilities. An example being, there's a 60% chance they're playing B this round, and a further 70% chance they will play on window, thus creating a total chance of 42% for that specific position. We map these out like a flowchart, each position having its own unique probability. Of course, this is done intuitively, as trying to forcibly calculate these positions would simply be too slow. Priorities. This is the hierarchy of what should take up your attention. This means some things are more important to be aiming at, and some things are less important. We are always thinking about balancing our security with how easy a kill is. The highest priority target is someone who is both the greatest threat and the easiest kill. An example being an AWPer who is walking down mid blindly. The lowest priority target would be someone who is a low-level threat but very hard to kill. An example being an eco player who is playing deep behind enemy lines. If we contrast both examples, we can visualize what we should be looking for. Not taking fights that provide no benefit, aiming for easy kills, and taking time to feel out your priorities. If you hold this attitude, you'll minimize needless aggressive plays and will maximize efficient plays. Peaks. This is how you enter an angle to attack. Peaking is affected heavily by mundane things like geometry and netcode. We call this the peeker's advantage. Geometry makes it so the closer you are to a wall you are peeking out from, the more visible you are. Here's a brief visual demonstration. Additionally, netcode, code to do with how the online servers interact with your PC, makes it so your actual movements are a little ahead of the visuals that the enemy sees. So as you peek, the enemy who is stood still has both their visuals and actual hitbox line up, whereas yours do not. So you can quite easily peek and shoot them with no problem. But for them, it's as though they see you for just a moment and die. The combination of the effect of netcode and geometry makes it so that deaths can seem unfair or too fast. How to do peeks. There is a gradient for the types of peeks you can choose from. The degree of lethality corresponds to how aggressive a peek is. If you peek wide, you have a greater chance of getting shot, simply because you are now more exposed. If you're safer, you peek less, but have a lower chance of landing a shot. The type of peek you choose should always correspond to how dangerous the angle is you're peeking. So if you're in a really dangerous situation, a shoulder peek is going to be your best call. Whereas if you're in a safer position, a crouch peek is better because you'll have a higher chance of killing the 1 or 2 people who may be there. Remember, this is just a general rule, and other factors like the amount of time you have or if you have a teammate to double peek with is going to change things. What makes a good peek? There's a systematic way to do a peek to maximize its effectiveness. Step 0. Figure out what type of peek you are doing. This is done by thinking, which do you prioritize more, lethality or safety? Step 1. Always be at max speed before being visible to the angle you are clearing. This makes it so you aren't as easily killed and it maximizes your peeker's advantage. Step 2. Be quite far behind the wall you are peeking. This gives you the time to build up momentum so you are actually at max speed. Step 3. When you reach the angle you are aiming for, stop as fast as possible. This makes it so you minimize the distance required to walk back behind cover. Step 4. Always have your crosshair on the angle you are peeking. This may sound obvious, but it is the key to making your peeks effective. Ideally have the position in mind before you peek. Step 5. Get back behind cover as fast as you had left it. This finishes the loop, returning you back to your starting position. Weapon Mastery. This is how good you are at any particular weapon in CS. You often hear people talk about X player being an AWP player, or X player having good spray control. These are both byproducts of Weapon Mastery. There are a variety of things that go into Weapon Mastery. How good your aim is as a whole, spray control, tapping control, and comfort with weapon. I have a playlist which goes into detail about aim, so I won't comment too deeply on that. As far as the other factors, your best bet is to practice them in deathmatch, whilst actively focusing mentally on your spray control. Keep in mind there are 3 types of weapons in CS: single shot, automatic, and scoped weapons. So you will see overlap in your skills with weapons of the same category. Movement Mastery. To round out your mechanics so you're a well-balanced player, you should develop Movement Mastery. This is because a disturbingly large amount of your mechanics is dependent on movement. Remember, if you avoid getting shot, you have more time to shoot them. Movement Mastery is expressed mainly through 3 forms: Deathmatch Movement, KZ Movement, and Pathing. Deathmatch Movement is how well your aim and movement sync up and how erratic/difficult to hit you are. Having synced up aim and movement lets you have greater accuracy, as your counter-strafing complements your aim. Counter-strafing is when you stop moving temporarily, giving you greater accuracy as opposed to when you are moving, creating a stutter effect. Additionally, having erratic movement where you are weaving between different covers significantly increases your survivability, which when combined with counter-strafes creates an aura of invincibility. KZ movement is derived from the game type KZ. This is a game mode similar to B-Hop or surfing that is done in community maps. It challenges you to use a combination of movement techniques in a low pressure setting with similar settings to a normal game of CS, so no auto B-Hop, etc. There are 8 tiers to KZ maps. In my opinion, if you can complete tier 4, you are probably as good as you need to be for competitive games. Going beyond this level will just increase your crispness or give you access to cool tricks, both of which are not necessary for the average player. Pathing is the culmination of both your DM movement and your KZ movement. It's blending both of these ideas with your intellect and positioning, meaning walking a path which is most strategically sound. The general pathing method is a system that looks like this. Avoid danger by abusing natural cover, always peek with strafing, not holding W. Clear as few angles as possible in the route you take. The more aggressive you are playing, the more angles you should be clearing with the path chosen. If we look back at peeking within the previous aim section, we can see how heavily pathing and movement mastery as a whole impacts our peeks. I describe it as though pathing and movement are the underlying basis which elevates our peeking to the next level. Synergistic skills. Role. Role can be quite a complex topic, so I have simplified it into a scale between more selfless and more selfish. The reason for this is because 99% of the population plays CS in a non-organized fashion, so particularly defined roles are pointless. Instead, it's more useful to be able to shift along the scale of more and less selfish, so you can adapt to situations. A selfless role is one where you sacrifice your own resources for the greater good of your team. This can be anything from being very aggressive as an entry, or using your util as a support player. The core idea is just self-sacrifice. Something in which some situations is great, and in others is horrible. A selfish role is one where you use the resources of yourself and your team for your own means. This could mean taking drops from friends, baiting teammates, or playing for 1v1s. My general rule of thumb is selfish is best for lower ranked games, and selfless is best for higher ranked games. Simply because what you can do as an individual gets smaller and smaller the higher ranked you are. Trying to coordinate with a silver is going to be unreliable. It's much better you just outplay the enemies for your own skill, rather than being dependent on a silver's inconsistent player. Of course, this is all relative, so be cautious and capable of shifting your mentality. Team/solo play. Team and solo play is built upon role. It is how you actualize your role. So if you are more of a selfless player, team play is more important, and vice versa. When playing a team game, you have to understand the network effect. This is the idea everything you do is relative to the network of your team and enemy team. A decision that may seem good in general because of your team or the enemy team can instead become horrible. Instead of separating team and solo play, we instead place it on the role gradient I mentioned before. Within team and solo play, there is the idea of a lane. A lane is a metaphysical space in which you should be playing. A lane can take on a team or solo nature. If your lane is that of a solo player, you must take on situations without expecting help. Alternatively, if your lane is that of a team player, you should play with the expectation of help. By making decisions with this in mind, we will encounter more appropriate situations. For example, if you were to take on a 2v1 as a solo player, it's no surprise that you would lose. You should instead aim for a more realistic 1v1 scenario, or alternatively, play as a team player and take the situation as a 2v2. This is also why solo play is more dependent on mechanics, and team play is more dependent on strategy. The ability to just out-aim an enemy gets more important the more solo you are playing, and vice versa, your ability to strategize to be in a more advantageous situation is more important for team play. The skills required for solo play are these: mechanics, isolating enemies into 1v1s, playing conservatively, and individual ego/confidence. The solo player mindset is analogous to a wild predatory animal. You want to spend as little resources as you can whilst maximizing your own success. Whereas the team player mindset is more similar to a prey animal, trying to overwhelm through numbers and not bringing down the collective through your own mistakes. Utility is broken up into these various subcategories. Most importantly, it's broken down into usage and aim. Usage leans towards intellectual, and aim of course leans to mechanical. But in reality, these are very tightly knit concepts which depend on one another. If you don't have the brain to intelligently use util, it doesn't matter if you can memorize lineups or aim it. Similarly, if you can come up with great ideas but just have no clue how to aim your util, it's effectively pointless. Furthermore, util is highly dependent on the aforementioned network effect, where the various positions of people on the map have a large impact. How you improve your utility is namely through the bottom section of the diagram, through improving your practiced or your intuitive utility. If you want to improve your practice, you should learn lineups which are most frequently used and have the greatest degree of impact. If you are unaware, a lineup is just memorizing how to throw a nade to land in a specific spot. What this means is, yes, memorize lineups, but only important ones. The reason being that it's more useful to have a lineup that you can both execute quickly and have a lot of experience playing around. If you start memorizing huge swaths of nade throws, you'll end up forgetting the majority and be unable to use the ones you do know effectively. If you want to improve intuitive, it's best done by getting a feel for the behavior of each grenade type. A good example is flashes. If you don't instinctively know how to time a pop flash so you don't get blinded, or know where in the throwing arc it goes off, you are severely limiting yourself. since it's a relatively easy thing to get a grasp of and can be useful in a wide variety of situations. Each grenade's characteristics can easily be memorized by actively using them in live games, not just in a private server. Be proactive in your games and experiment by throwing utils spontaneously or with a plan. Don't be afraid that you will fail, because the important thing with utility is not how you throw it, it's how you use it after it's been thrown. In this last part of the video, I'm going to give you some advice on how to implement the various skills I mentioned in this video. First, make sure you know what level you are approaching this from. Are you a noob, beginner, intermediate, or pro player? The lower you are in the hierarchy, the more you will benefit from rewatching and memorizing the content of this video. The higher you are, the more you should be looking to just self-analyze and see if you have any gaps in your gameplay relating to the skills. After that, you should spend some time to foster a good attitude when it comes to using them. I think playing intuitively is always better than being overly analytical. A game like CS is too fast-paced to come up with convoluted plans, so you should endeavor to be able to do all three types: mechanics, cerebral, and synergistic skills automatically. Now, does that mean you should be brain dead? No, not at all. It simply means you should be intentionally focusing on them without getting too anxious about what is specifically the best action to do. Instead, try to dial in on a single thing by reviewing your games with the replay feature, then improving only on that single thing until it's no longer a weakness. An example would be poor mechanics, bad utility, bad game sense, etc. Additionally, there is your emotional attitude. This is how you feel about the game, often called your mental. A good mental enhances your baseline ability, think flow state, whereas a bad mental hinders your baseline ability, think being tilted. The key to having maximized good mental is self-determinism, the belief/confidence that exudes from you when you know you are good at something. And the key to minimizing bad mental is objectivism, holding realistic perspectives that are neither optimistic or pessimistic. An example would be not over-exaggerating how important having a good rank is, or crying about someone being rude to you. If you ground yourself in these states of mind, you won't be as easily knocked off course by outside conditions. Furthermore, your overall potential will increase, since you will no longer limit yourself through poor self-esteem. I will be making many more videos about mentality in a broader sense, so subscribe if you wish to see them. Our mindset during play is really important. I like to imagine it like a series of filters our mind should run through during games. This is also why I structured the diagram in the way it is. The more central a concept, the higher priority in the series of filters it is. What I mean by this is, you first think about push and peel, then the primary concepts, then the secondary, and finally tertiary. This ensures that you aren't leaving gaps in your gameplay, so if a more skilled player were to watch your gameplay, they would think something like this. Okay, so yes, they made mistakes, but it's very clear that they're putting effort in all the important areas. That might sound a bit abstract, so let me ground it for you. Push and peel basically dictates how aggressive or passive we are playing. If we push when we should be peeling, or vice versa, we will be actively missing out on opportunities. This is because we will either be dead, or we will have missed an opportunity to attack. Next is the primary idea of aiming, positioning, and our role. Each of these skills will determine the bulk of our playstyle, and if they are not good enough for the situation, or just don't fit the situation, then regardless of how good our secondary or tertiary skills, we simply will not bring enough value to win our games. Then secondary skills follow suit, basically creating some additional spaces in which we can compete with the enemy to either give ourselves some more advantages, or level out the playing field by lowering our disadvantages. A good example would be spray control. It won't necessarily make you a good player inherently, but it will give you that extra boost, especially against someone who has comparatively bad sprays. Finally, we have tertiary skills. At this point, we've gone down the chain of filters and reached the things that will only give you situational benefits. Having good communication might secure an extra kill every other round, great utility will help secure a bomb site, and good movement can certainly give you extra survivability. But remember, none of these things will inherently make you a good player. They will only give you those marginal differences which those other higher priority skills can then boost off of. So, to recap, have an awareness of all of the skills as you play. Think of them as a series of checkboxes that get less important as you go down. And don't neglect ways you can use skills together. The ideal is to really have all of them complement each other to put you in the best situation possible. Thank you for watching. I have many other videos similar to this one, so please subscribe if you found it useful.